Hello and welcome to another intensivecarehotline.com live stream. Thank you so much for joining the call, and thank you for already posting some questions here. I will get to them in a minute. Thanks again for watching. And today I will answer your questions again. Before I go into your questions, what makes me qualified to answer questions for families in intensive care? Again, my name is Patrik Hutzel, founder of intensivecarehotline.com. I am a critical care nurse by background, having worked in intensive care / critical care for nearly 25 years now in 3 different countries. I have worked as a nurse unit manager for over 5 years in intensive care. I have been consulting and advocating for families in intensive care for over 10 years now, all over the world. You can look up our testimonial section at intensivecarehotline.com. You can also watch some interviews that I've done with some clients on our podcast section at intensivecarehotline.com. I'm also the founder of intensivecareathome.com, where we send intensive care nurses into the home, predominantly for long-term intensive care patients with tracheostomy and ventilation. Now, without further ado, I want to get right into your questions. There's Healthy, Wealthy and Wise, who says, our friend for 30 years has been in ICU for 12 days. What is the best way to support the family? Do you have any suggestions? She's a 51-year-old female mother of 2 teens and her husband in a critical condition after an MVA. MVA stands for motor vehicle accident. She has multiple fractures, internal injuries to her liver and small intestines, microclots on the brain, and brain bleeds under control. And A was just given a tracheostomy, still in induced coma, just looking for any direction. Thank you. Sure. That sounds like a very difficult situation. The best way to support the family is actually making them aware of that they need support. A lot of families, might want to appear brave, and they think, they know enough to get through this difficult situation. Now, I think the best way you can do with your friends, family, is really, be there for them, being an active listener, and making sure they look after themselves. Because one of the things that I've seen over and over again, dealing with patients in intensive care, whether when I was still working in intensive care or even now as a consultant, it is critically important that families in intensive care learn to look after themselves as well, because they can get burned out so quickly during such a stressful time. They spend days and nights in intensive care, to be with a loved one, understandably, but they burn out in the process, and they need to stay level-headed, because they will need to make informed decisions, have peace of mind, control, power and influence. And the more they burn out, the further away they move from making informed decisions, being in control, having power and influence, right? So it's critically important that they keep looking after themselves, and they don't burn themselves out in the process. Sometimes we have families coming to us, they're so burned out, they're so exhausted, they don't see the wood for the trees, right? And level-headedness is very important in a situation like that. And you can only stay level-headed if you get enough rest, if you get enough sleep, if you're taking a break, if you eat and drink, get fresh air, you get sunshine. All of that needs to be part of the process, rather than spending every waking minute with your friend in ICU. So that is my advice in terms of what's the best way to support the family. Another way to support the family is making them aware that probably they don't know what they don't know. They don't know what to look for. They don't know what questions to ask. They don't know their rights, and they don't know how to manage doctors and nurses in intensive care. We have so many families coming to us after their loved ones have been in intensive care, and maybe after their loved ones pass away, saying, oh, I had no idea there's someone who can provide a second opinion online. I had no idea that consulting and advocacy even exists for families in intensive care. So, point out to them that there is probably many things they don't know that they even don't know, you know. Now, in terms of the critical condition after the MVA, she has multiple fractures, internal injuries to her liver and small intestines, microclots on the brain, and brain bleeds, which are now under control. She was just given a tracheostomy, still in induced coma. So if she's still in an induced coma after 12 days, and she has particularly microclots on the brain and brain bleeds, there's a very high chance she has a traumatic brain injury. And therefore, I'm not surprised that she's still in an induced coma and that they've done a tracheostomy, because one of the things that is probably happening here is she has high intracranial pressures, also known as high brain pressures. Now, if they can't control the brain pressures, they often need to put patients back into an induced coma, because if the brain pressures are not under control, it's very easy for patients to have permanent and irreversible brain damage. So they are protecting the brain probably by keeping her in an induced coma. Now, other reasons why she might be in an induced coma you are talking about, she has multiple fractures, internal injuries to her liver and small intestines. You know, another thing that might be happening here is she might be waiting for surgery, you know, especially if she's unstable. And it sounds to me like she is unstable still. That's often another reason why patients stay in an induced coma for longer than expected, simply because they are very unstable. And if she has brain bleeds, that could, you know, lead to clinical instability, once again, with high intracranial brain pressures, right? Maybe with seizures, right? Epileptic episodes, which might be one of the many reasons why she's still sedated. Now, if she's awaiting surgery and they can't do surgery yet, and she's in pain, that could be another reason why, you know, she's still in an induced coma. Sometimes in situations like that, there can be a delay until surgery can be performed, again, because of clinical instability, maybe availability of surgeons. I don't know where you are, you know, I don't know which hospital your friend is at. Is it a big hospital? Is it a small hospital? You know, is she potentially awaiting a transfer to another hospital that hasn't, you know, because of more resources available there, has that not been able to facilitate, once again, because of lack of resources? You know, I have seen many of those situations where so many factors come into play. Now, the best place to be in a situation like that is in a big, you know, metropolitan hospital where all the resources and expertise is available. I don't know, you know, where your friend is, but I hope that paints some of the picture here. You know, is she waiting for more surgery for her brain, for example, you know, and once they can do more brain surgery, will that help her waking up? You know, is she in an induced coma still because she's hemodynamically unstable to the point, you know, where she's on multiple inotropes or vasopressors to support her blood pressure here? I don't want to get too medical here, but, you know, I can paint the picture, you know, from a clinical perspective, why she's most likely still in an induced coma after 12 days. Here is another thing. You know, if you look at any of my videos over the last few years, most of the time when someone is having a tracheostomy in ICU, they can be woken up and they can have sedation removed. But because your friend is having significant brain injuries, she probably is not ready to be removed from the induced coma, right? You're saying she has had surgery and is in a level 2 trauma center. Thank you for your advice. Sure, that's good that she had surgery, but often what happens if patients have multiple fractures, it might be that she needs multiple surgeries, you know, I don't know. And the other question is, when was the last surgery? Was it yesterday? Was it a week ago? You know, if it was yesterday, for example, is she bleeding? You know, does she need blood transfusions? You know, there are so many variables when someone is in a situation in intensive care like your friend is, you know. Also, you're talking about internal injuries to her liver and small intestines. You know, again, if she is having injuries to her liver, is she having internal bleeding? Is her liver function impaired by that? Right, with small intestines injury, does she have a colostomy bag? There are so many questions here, but I hope that gives you some guidance here where to go, whether it's on how you can support the family, but also how can the family manage such a difficult situation? How can they deal with the trauma, the psychological trauma they sustained as a family? That's all part of it. How can you get through all the clutter of what's happening in a difficult situation like that probably appears very chaotic from the outside? One other recommendation that I have is, they could get access to the medical records. They could look through the medical records. That could be overwhelming, might be overwhelming, and they might want to stay away from that. But like I always say, the sooner you can start doing your own research, the better, because you don't want to be flying blind either. I do believe, you can't just trust blindly either. However, if they've done a tracheostomy, that to me is a sign that they want to give her that chance to recover, no matter what and no matter how long it takes. So I hope that helps. Now, I don't know whether you have anything else to add to this situation. I can also, if you want to, I could also get you on the call here through a link, and you can ask direct questions here with me, where you can talk to me directly. You don't have to go on camera. Just let me know if that's what you would like, because then I can send you the invite here. Hang on, I can send you the invite here for anyone who wants to get on the call live with me here and wants to ask me questions directly here by talking to me. I've sent the link here, and you can just click on the link, and then I can let you in here. In the meantime, I will read out other questions that have come in during the week. You just gotta give me 1 second, and I will read out some of the questions that have come in during the week. And please either type your questions into the chat pad for now, or join me on this call, right? And then I can get to them. So anyway, let's look at the first question that came in from AJ, who says, "Thanks, Patrik, for making your videos on YouTube and on your website. I really appreciate your work. We are currently in a similar situation with my dad having a cardiac arrest and being in a coma state for the past month and a half. He had downtime of roughly 10 to 15 minutes, but we are willing to let go. We didn't receive much support from hospital staff, just the same things that you mentioned. From day one to today, we have seen many small improvements and just hoping for the best recovery possible. Thanks again for the info and resources." Now, this is a comment on a video that I made, where the title of the video, "Slow Recovery from Anoxic Brain Injury." So obviously AJ's dad, after cardiac arrest, has been recovering very, very slowly and is not waking up. So what should you do in a situation like that? Well, there are two things you can do, AJ, in a situation like that. The first thing is be patient, and I know that is so much easier said than done. Be patient, making sure your dad gets best care and treatment, gets stimulation, gets mobilized, assuming there are no contraindications for mobilization. You will only find out if he improves over time. If nature takes its course, there's not much you can do, but at least keep trying. And I can only imagine how frustrating it is that you didn't receive much support from hospital staff. But you have two choices here. You either keep going or you give up. You didn't say whether your dad has a tracheostomy, a ventilator. If he does have that, then you can easily proceed to palliative care and hospice care, but it doesn't sound like that's what you want. And once you proceed to hospice care or palliative care, it's too late. there's no return from that. But anyway, I hope that helps, AJ. And I know you've sent another follow-up message where you're saying a little bit later this week, we are now doing slightly better. Thanks for asking. It gets challenging to manage, but so much better than being in a hospital, trying everything possible to help him improve. So that's great, AJ, that you have pursued that path to help your dad. And it's a very steep road that you're on. I get that, but what's the alternative? Giving up? I'm not sure whether that is even an alternative. Anyway, I have William McCarthy here, and William, you're one of our members. Thank you so much for joining the call. I really appreciate it. And you have questions here. If you are in a critical state in the ICU with a tracheostomy, can you extend your stay in the hospital and not be pushed out? What are your rights? Yes, great question, William. Yes, there is. What I'll do is we have a document from a law firm in the US that highlights your rights in terms of that the hospital can't just push you out. I'll make sure my team will email that to you, William. That's number one. That's one of the ways to extend your stay in hospital. I also believe you are referring to your loved one being pushed to an LTAC. I think that's what you are referring to, because I know your case, of course, and you are probably referring to being pushed out to an LTAC because you are in the US. So that's number one. We will send you the document that we have from a law firm in the US that highlights your rights in terms of that the hospital can't just discharge your loved one without your consent. That's number one. Number two, ask the hospital for their discharge policy. Now, everything in a hospital has a policy. Everything. Mopping the floor, cleaning the windows has a policy. Now, do you think discharging a patient from an ICU or from a hospital has a policy? Absolutely, yes. And I almost can assure you that in that hospital policy, it says something along the lines of, well, a family or a next of kin or a power of attorney has to give consent, assuming a patient can't give consent themselves. Now, there are exceptions to the rule, of course, like if someone is well enough to go home from hospital, of course, they couldn't refuse. But, in your situation, your loved one is sick. They wouldn't be safe going to an LTAC or to a care home. That would be madness and insanity. We have published so much content over the years where patients are going from ICU to LTAC, and within a couple of days, they're bouncing back into ICU. And the sad thing here is, William, for anyone, William, or anyone watching, the sad thing is they're bouncing back into another ICU because the ICU that they've been discharged from no longer has a bed available. So picture this, your loved one is critically ill in intensive care. They're going to an LTAC. Within 2 days, they deteriorate, as many patients do, and then they bounce back to another ICU. That basically means a vulnerable patient depending on life support is going to 3 places or is in 3 places within a few days. That is madness. That is madness and insanity, and it shows that the system is failing patients and families on all levels. And you don't want to be in a position like that. Now, here's another tip, William. I am sure that the hospital is probably giving you something, some talk about, oh yeah, your family member is running out of insurance entitlements. Now, I am not suggesting to ignore that. However, what I am suggesting is to double and triple check. If you don't hear from the insurance, right? If you don't hear from the insurance telling you, hey, your family member is running out of entitlements, you need to make a decision. You need to go to LTAC, you need to go to a care home, whatever the case may be. I wouldn't be worried too much about it, because the hospital, as long as they don't give you evidence and saying, hey, look, we've got a letter here from the health insurance, saying you only have a couple of more days left. in hospital, and then you need to go to LTAC, that would be a different story. If you get phone calls, if you get letters, emails from the health insurance, fair enough, you probably should be paying attention to that. However, we've been doing this for many years, and by making a clinical argument, by looking at medical records, which is what we're doing in your situation, William, it all comes down to the clinical argument saying, your loved one going to LTAC would be a clinical risk, and here is why it would be a clinical risk. Here is why we think your loved one will bounce back into ICU pretty quickly. So, that's where a second opinion is coming in and is so important, So it really comes down to that. I hope that helps, William, and I'll make sure my team will email you that document from the legal firm that we are in contact with, and hopefully help you from there. But in the interim, you can also ask for the hospital discharge policy, and well, they should have nothing to hide there. And if they can't give you the hospital discharge policy, that'll probably tell you what's in the hospital discharge policy. It'll probably support your claim and my claim if they can't give you the hospital discharge policy. Just something for you to think about. Right, Leo, you are saying if your family member is on the ventilator with an anoxic brain injury in ICU while you're far away from your home, can we safely transfer a patient home or suggest how to get him home and not spend too much money? Great question, Leo. Great question. So, without knowing the ins and outs, I'd say yes. And here's why I say yes, you can transfer your loved one safely. Here's why I say yes. There are many patients in ICU that are being transferred from one ICU to another, often in very critical conditions, right? Like I mentioned in the beginning, when our other viewer here, Healthy, Wealthy and Wise, had questions about her friend in ICU after, significant trauma. If she, for example, was in an ICU that doesn't have all the resources, she would need to be flown to or transferred to another hospital with more resources, and that is all possible. After initial stabilization in an emergency room, emergency department, then patients go into ICU. And if they need to be transferred to another hospital because the expertise is simply not available in a particular hospital, or you want to get closer to home, absolutely, this is all possible. The highest end patients that are being flown around in helicopters and planes and road ambulances are patients on ECMO for heart failure or for lung failure. They're basically being flown in airplanes and helicopters and on road ambulances on bypass machines for heart and lungs, right? So I don't know your exact situation, Leo, but I say a cautious yes that this is possible, right? A few years ago, we have actually helped a family to organize a transfer from Melbourne in Australia to Beijing in China. And their family member was on a ventilator with a breathing tube, right? It took a couple of weeks to get it organized, don't get me wrong, but the patient arrived safely in Beijing on a 12-hour flight or something like that, right? So it's all possible. The other thing that I remember when I worked in ICU, there was a gentleman that we looked after, a 60 or 65-year-old rabbi from Israel who had a cardiac arrest. And again, he was a visitor here in Melbourne, and he had a cardiac arrest, and he was dying. There was no question that he would pass away. And, the family and the Jewish community wanted to have him pass away at home in Israel. And they were flying him back on multiple forms of life support. And they managed to get him back to Jerusalem, and he passed away there. So, it is definitely all possible. Now you're saying, Leo, Mayo Clinic in Florida to New York City. Now I would imagine Florida to New York City is probably, 5-hour flight. I'd say, now that I've given you some examples, 12-hour flight, Melbourne to Israel, that's probably another 12, 15-hour flight. You know, Florida to New York City is not 12 hours. I don't know, it might be 4 to 6 hours. I'm not exactly sure. But you can see that this is definitely 2-hour flight. Well, it's up the road. It's up the road. So, so definitely doable, assuming your family member is stable enough. Now, in terms of cost, it won't be cheap, but you know, it might be something your health insurance will cover. I don't know. You know, you might have to go on a crowdfunding round. You know, there are several ways to raise money. That's just some ideas for you here, Leo, that I hope will help you to take the next steps, right? Okay, so then let's move on to the next question. If you have any other questions, please type them into the chat pad or just join me here live on the call. I'll put the link here again. Oh, I'll put the link here again just in case you want to. It's a pleasure, Leo. Let me know if you have any other questions. Here's the link again if you want to join me on the call and ask questions on the live stream. Now, let's get on to the next question from Shanta. And Shanta says, my mother's anxiety is getting the best of her and it's taking a longer time due to her tracheostomy collar training. She has been in the hospital for 2 months and can only do 3 sittings at maybe 2 hours each, and her anxiety makes breathing hard. She had a double lung transplant in the hospital. Wow, that's a difficult situation. So let me explain to you, Shanta, what I know about lung transplants and what I can see in a situation like that. I've looked after many lung transplant patients in ICU, and often the starting point for someone on a lung transplant is they're at home, they're oxygen dependent, they have a very low exercise tolerance, and they can really do nothing, right? And the fear and the psychological pressure on them is pretty high because they also know that if they don't get a lung transplant, that eventually they can't survive. So you know, the psychological pressure that those patients are under is very high. So then finally they get a lung transplant, which is great, right? And then they wake up. Some lung transplants go really well. They wake up, you can extubate them, you can get them off the ventilator pretty quickly. And you know, you can even get them out of ICU within a few days or a week or so. Now, some lung transplants may not go all that well for a number of reasons. You know, maybe surgery takes longer than expected. Maybe there's an issue with the size of the donor lungs. Maybe there's an issue with, you know, matching the donor with the recipient. There's all sorts of issues that can happen. Then sometimes patients come back after lung transplants. They might need to be ventilated for a few more days. They may have challenges getting off the ventilator. And then they may end up with a tracheostomy. They may even end up on ECMO, right? And then everything is getting delayed. Okay, including weaning off the ventilator, including weaning off the tracheostomy. Okay. And then you've got the psychological component of someone pre-lung transplant that was in pretty poor shape, right? So there could be huge psychological component. Now all of a sudden you're meant to be well because you've got a new set of lungs, right? But you're not feeling it psychologically, right? So that could be part of it, that your mum needs to come to terms that she can actually improve, right? Or there could simply be clinical issues. It could be a combination of both, right? So now what to do from here? Now, my strong recommendation here, first off, would be that if she's so anxious in hospital, why wouldn't she consider going home with intensive care at home? That would be my biggest advice here, that going home would probably alleviate some of the anxiety, right? ICUs are not great places. They're great if someone is critically ill and they need, all the bells and whistles of an ICU to save their lives and so forth. Now, in your situation, though, I feel like your mom will be much better off by going home with a service like intensive care at home, right? If you don't know what intensive care at home is, have a look at intensivecareathome.com. With intensive care at home, we are providing home care services with intensive care and critical care nurses, predominantly for long-term ventilated adults and children with tracheostomies. So, therefore, your mom would be an ideal candidate. Imagine at home she has a regular team of critical care nurses coming in. Whereas at the moment in an ICU, she probably has people coming and going all the time. Different doctors, different nurses every day. There's no consistency, right? The only consistency probably in your mother's mind is that things are not progressing, right? Imagine at home, we're setting up intensive care at home, and then you have a regular team coming in, the same nurses coming in, a doctor overseeing, it's a different ball game. Absolutely different ball game. The good news is she is being weaned off the ventilator now. She's on trach training, but if she's been in hospital for 2 months, I mean, she's probably getting depressed by now. Depression is a huge factor in ICU, and the sooner you can get out of that environment, the better it is. So my recommendation here, Shanti, is intensive care at home. I don't know where you are. You haven't shared your location. With intensive care at home, currently we are operating all around Australia, in all major capital cities, but even remote and rural areas. And we are NDIS funded, or we are an NDIS service provider. We are TAC funded in Victoria, NDIS all around Australia, iCare in New South Wales, NIISQ in Queensland, as well as the DVA, Department of Veteran Affairs. We are now also engaging with private health insurances. We also have received funding through departments of health and public hospitals. So that is my advice here, Shanti, what to do next. Okay, let's move on to another question, or to the next question from Tanya. Tanya says, my dad has been in cardiac ICU for 2 months. They're trying to transfer him to LTAC. Well, how can I stop them from moving him to LTAC? Well, great question, Tanya. Similar to the question that William had earlier, where I said, well, first off, you shouldn't go to LTAC. Secondly, you have rights. Thirdly, contact us directly. We can help you also with the document. But also, in the meantime, ask them for the hospital discharge policy. Ask them for the hospital discharge policy. I argue that hospital discharge policy will say something along the lines of that patient can't go unless you or the patient has given consent. That's assuming you are the power of attorney, Tanya, for your dad. Very simple equation. Your dad can only go if he's giving consent, or if you are giving consent. Also, have another look online. What are the reviews of LTACs online? Have a look for yourself. What are the reviews of LTACs online? Right? They're no good. And the good news is you are looking for advice and you are seeking help. So stand your ground. Also, another thing, and the same for you, William, I forgot to mention that earlier. Do not give consent to a PEG tube. Do not give consent to a PEG tube. The reason for that is that most LTACs cannot look after a after a nasogastric tube. The alternative to a PEG tube is a nasogastric tube. Just keep your loved one with a nasogastric tube and don't give consent to a PEG tube. Most LTACs can't take patients without a PEG tube. That will also is telling you everything you need to know about LTACs if they can't look after a nasogastric tube, right? That means they have very low skills. Now, if they can't look after a nasogastric tube, how can they possibly look after a ventilator or a tracheostomy? Think about that. Ventilator and tracheostomy are much more complex than a nasogastric tube. So if they can't look after a nasogastric tube, how can they possibly look after a ventilator and a trach, let alone wean patients off the ventilator and the trach, right? So keep asking questions here, very important. Okay, next question is from Tony, who says, my mother just passed away this Saturday. She had a kidney stone that blocked her left kidney. Then she became septic and went to hospital. Via ambulance, they put her on a ventilator and she ended up with kidney failure and died. It all happened so fast. She was diabetic and the primary care doctor prescribed OxyContin, Percocet and gabapentin, and fentanyl when she really had no real pain, and it all masked the kidney stone. She had no idea, no pain she could feel. So when she became septic, it was too late. How can I make the doctor accountable for prescribing enough drugs that it masks the kidney stone size of a golf ball? Please help. Wow, I'm very sorry, Tony, to hear that. My advice here is, you should be getting access to the medical records. That's, again, assuming that you were the power of attorney. Get access to the medical records. And, you can look at them yourself, but, it really takes an expert to look at them. And we can look at the medical records and find out, what exactly happened, and has the pain been masked because she wasn't too much fentanyl, OxyContin? That is definitely a possibility, but we would need to verify that, obviously, in by reviewing the medical records, right? Then I also have the next question from Z, who says, my dad had a septic shock. He got pneumonia from which he recovered almost 70%, but his creatinine levels started increasing in the range of 2 to 2.5. And also his urine tests showing red blood cell count of 88 to 90 and white cell count of 45 to 47. He also got he's also got sepsis. What should I do? His saturation is good. He doesn't need oxygen. Well, you're not saying here whether your dad is still in ICU. You're not saying if your dad is still on a ventilator. It's difficult for me to say what should be happening next, because when you're saying his saturation is good, does that mean he's on a ventilator or does it mean he's off the ventilator? There's a difference if his saturation is good whilst being on the ventilator with a breathing tube or with a tracheostomy, or if saturation is good by being off the ventilator, right? So if you could share with me whether your dad is off the ventilator or on the ventilator, that would really be helpful. Now, his white cell count with 45 to 47 is really high. Normal white cell count is usually 4 to 11, right? If his creatinine level is increasing, is he making urine? If he's not making urine, are they giving him Lasix or furosemide or any other diuretic to increase his urine output? If he's not having any of it and he's not making urine, are they starting him on dialysis or hemofiltration, right? So those are the questions that I would have for you, Z. It's not enough information for you to guide. Now, I do believe that with a white cell count of 45 to 47, and with his creatinine levels high, I do believe your dad might still be on the ventilator. But, even if his oxygen saturation is good on the ventilator, there is a process he will need to go through to be weaned off the ventilator. Then steps need to be taken, which I won't go into detail now. I encourage you to look up an article in the video, how to wean a critically ill patient off the ventilator and the breathing tube, right? There would be a similar article, how to wean a critically ill patient off the ventilator and the tracheostomy. So I hope that helps. And we can move on to the next question from Joanna, who says, how can I decide if the ICU team has done everything they can? Oh, what a great question. Love that question. Well, you probably can't without having a second opinion, right? A lot of the work that we're doing is reviewing medical records or talking to doctors and nurses directly. We can find out very quickly if the ICU team has done everything they can. We can ascertain that very, 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 very quickly. And, I think every family in intensive care needs to ask that question very quickly, especially if you think your loved one might be in ICU for some time to come. You need to ask that very question pretty quickly, and you probably can't answer it yourself. That's the bad news. But the good news is there's help, and we can answer the question for you by either talking to them directly or by looking at medical records. Ideally, do a combination of both. So, if you want that second opinion, go to intensivecarehotline.com and we can help you with that very quickly. Now, next question. And please, in the meantime, if you have any other questions, type them into the chat pad or join me live on the stream here if you wish. Now, question from Sharon, who says, "Hi Patrick, my mum was intubated from November the 7th to November the 18th. When the time she was extubated, she went into cardiac arrest, and then she got reintubated again. But the doctor told us that my mum's brain has no activity. Maybe she's even brain dead. On the day she had 3 cardiac arrests and then she died. Why do you think the doctor extubates my mum? But I think when she's really not ready to be extubated. While she was potentially in the weaning stage. At first, we really didn't want my mum to be intubated, but according to her ABG test, her oxygen level was 48% only. So the doctors advised us that she really needed to be intubated. And I agree with that. If her oxygen in the ABG was 48%, she needed to be intubated. If we don't allow her to be intubated, is it possible for her just to have oxygen? Look, with PO2 in the arterial blood gas of 48%, oxygen may only get her so far. Would be curious to find out if her CO2 was high as well. Because we are really blaming ourselves because we let her to be intubated. My mum got shingles in the neck up to her head that led to encephalitis. We really need some advice from you. Thank you, and more power. From Sharon. Look, with PO2 of 48% in the blood gas, there's a very high chance she needed to be intubated. Very, very high chance. Okay. But there are other criteria for intubation too. Maybe she was unconscious. There is also a higher chance of your mum becoming unconscious with a PO2 of 48%. Right? And if she's unconscious, she wouldn't be able to maintain an airway, a safe airway, I should say. And if she can't maintain a safe airway, she needs to be intubated. So please don't blame yourself, because they might have actually done the right thing. And whilst it's terrible to hear your mum has passed away, maybe they have done the right thing regardless. Also, was she brain dead? You may want to find out if she was brain dead. Because if she was, that also puts a different spin on it, right? Similar to our previous question, you should get access to the medical records, right? You should get access to the medical records and have a second opinion, even though now your mom has gone, unfortunately, and condolences to you and your family, of course. But, a second opinion will give you closure. We can look at the medical records and we can find out what has exactly happened. Have they done the right thing by intubating her? What happened that led to cardiac arrest? Was there medical negligence? We can definitely help you with any of that, Sharon. Right? So, I hope that helps, Sharon. Then, next question. From Morgan, who says, my mom is in ICU with toxic metabolic encephalopathy after bypass grafts, coronary artery bypass grafts. So I wonder what happened that led to metabolic encephalopathy after bypass grafts, right? Again, it's probably not quite enough information to find out after cardiac surgery. Now, it basically means there has been some neurological complication after bypass surgery, right? The question is why? And I have not heard of metabolic complications after bypass surgery. What I have heard of neurological complications after cardiac surgery is mainly strokes, right? That is what can happen, not often, but it can happen. And if she's in encephalopathy, she's probably delirious, she's probably having seizures, she's probably in a coma, and that's not a good sign. That is definitely not a good sign. And what are they going to do about it? And what's the underlying issue? Has a neurologist been consulted? You need to consult a neurologist in a situation like that. How many days has it been since your mom had cardiac surgery? Right? Is she having seizures? Has she had CT scan of the brain, MRI scan of the brain? Has she had a lumbar puncture? Right? Those are all very relevant questions for your mom's situation. And get a second opinion. Contact us here at intensivecarehotline.com so we can either look at medical records or we can talk to doctors and nurses directly and find out what's exactly happened. What are her arterial blood gases today? That would be a very important question to find out. And why did she go into metabolic encephalopathy? What happened to the cardiac surgery? Has something gone wrong? Right? Has something gone wrong? Okay, so let's move on to the next question before we wrap this up for today. Question from Rebecca, who says, hi Patrick, my name is Rebecca. My mom had a cardiac arrest 8 days ago. She was PEA, which PEA stands for pulseless electrical activity. She was down for 28 minutes. Emergency medics were present and she went pulseless. EEG says she had an anoxic event and neuron firing is slowed. The MRI shows nothing good or bad. When propofol is held to check if she can follow commands, she can't at this time. She moves her head side to side, not constantly or rhythmic. She feels pain, frowns her face. How long do we give to check the brain injury? To check for brain injury, because ICU says a few more days. She's on a ventilator as well. Thank you so much from Rebecca. Right, okay. So it's interesting that, the EEG says there has been an anoxic event. and neuron firing has been slowed. MRI is neutral. And when propofol is held to check if she can follow command, she can't at this time. But she moves the head side to side, not constantly arrhythmic. Interesting. So she's moving. There's definitely something there. What you're not saying is how long. Oh, 8 days now. 8 days, yeah. Sure. Look, Rebecca, very early days. You got to give this time. Now, the other question is she off sedation? Is she off opiates? Because if she's not, then of course she's not waking up. If she's been off sedation for a few days, then the question is, why is she not waking up? Especially if MRI says, shows nothing. Sometimes patients don't wake up after cardiac arrest, even if they haven't been on sedation. They just need time. But sometimes patients also don't wake up without a brain injury and just coming off sedation, and their brain is perfectly intact, and sometimes they're not waking up either. So it's also important that you understand 8 days in ICU is not a long time. Most families think 3 days in ICU is a long time. 8 days in ICU is a long time. It's not. It's not a long time. 8 weeks in ICU is a fairly long time. But after 8 days, it's way too early to jump to conclusions and say, oh, this is definitely going here, this is going there. At the moment, you need to give it time. After 8 days of not waking up, does she need a tracheostomy? That's assuming she's still on a ventilator, right? I don't know any of that, but that is a valid question. That is a question you need to ask. Does she need a tracheostomy? If she's having pain, that's actually a good sign. Or if you can actually check for pain, that is actually a good sign, because it means the brain is working to some degree. Okay, so in this situation, I do believe your next steps are, she might need a tracheostomy if she's not waking up to protect her airway. Once she has a tracheostomy, they can get her out of bed. They might even be able to get her out of bed now, but the sooner she has a tracheostomy, the quicker they can get her out of bed. If they can extubate her, that would be fantastic. That would be the ideal scenario, but I wouldn't know. Again, go and have a look at my article and video, how to wean a critically ill patient off the ventilator and the breathing tube. Have a look at that. Right, that'll help you in making a decision or a determination whether she needs a tracheostomy or not. If she's not waking up, she most likely will need a tracheostomy, because she needs to protect her airway. She needs to cough, she needs to swallow, all of that. Okay, I think I want to leave it there today with answering questions. If you have one last question to ask, please type it in now. Other than that, I just want to thank you for coming onto the call. I really appreciate if you can like the video, if you can subscribe to my YouTube channel for regular updates, so that you can get the invites for new videos and also get the invites for the YouTube lives. Share the video with your friends and families, click the notification bell, and comment below what questions and insights you have, so that I can answer them. Now, we also have a membership for families of critically ill patients in intensive care, and in the membership you have access to me and my team 24 hours a day in the membership area and via email, and we answer all questions intensive care related. You get access to the membership by clicking on intensivecarehotline.com on the membership link, or by going to intensivecaresupport.org directly. I also offer one-on-one consulting and advocacy over the phone via Skype, Zoom, email, WhatsApp, whichever medium works best for you. I talk to doctors and nurses directly. I ask all the questions you haven't even considered asking, but you must ask, in order to make informed decisions, have peace of mind, control, power, and influence. Once again, I have worked in intensive care/critical care for over 20 years in 3 different countries, and where I also worked as a nurse unit manager, I have been consulting and advocating for families in intensive care as part of Intensive Care Hotline for over 10 years. I have decades of experience with intensive care at home as well. So please reach out to me directly at intensivecareathome.com. We also offer medical record reviews, so that you can have a second opinion in real time. So we offer medical record reviews in real time, so you can have a second opinion in real time. We also offer medical record reviews after intensive care if you have unanswered questions if you need closure or if you are simply suspecting medical negligence. Now, thank you so much for watching. Once again, subscribe to my YouTube channel for regular updates for families in intensive care. Click the like button, click the notification bell, share the video, and comment below your comments and questions. Thank you so much for watching. I'll do another YouTube live next Sunday, 10:30 a.m. Sydney, Melbourne time, which is 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on a Saturday in the US, 3:30 p.m. Pacific time next Saturday in the US. Thank you so much for watching. This is Patrik Hutzel from intensivecarehotline.com and intensivecareathome.com, and I will talk to you in a few days. Take care for now, and thanks again for all your support. Take care.